Welcome. Thank you for participating in this module, Data-Informed Decision Making. It's part of our PBIS Fundamental Learning Series. Here are our learning intentions for this session. We're going to examine how and why PBIS teams use data, and we're going to utilize the data decision-making process to create precision statements and develop action plans. We begin with a shared understanding of what positive behavioral interventions and supports is in Virginia Beach City Public Schools. Anchored to Goal 2 within our strategic framework, PBIS focuses on the goal of student well-being. PBIS is a data-informed decision-making framework for establishing the social, culture, and behavioral and academic supports needed for a school to be an effective learning environment for all students. A key question is, how can we use data to determine solutions and to inform future support? Every goal within the strategic framework has an embedded equity emphasis. Within Goal 2, we are focused on engaging in culturally responsive practices division-wide. We identify and address inequities in discipline practices by investigating and implementing best practices and seeking innovative solutions. Through PBIS, Virginia Beach City Public Schools has a desire to move toward equitable discipline and foster positive school climate. Through the use of a tiered framework, PBIS provides support for all at the Tier 1 level, some at the Tier 2 level, and a few at the Tier 3 level. Tier 1 involves several core components or supports. These include relationship and community building, common language of expectations, consistent structure and routines, student engagement, pro-social behavior acknowledgement, effective responses to inappropriate behavior. PBIS teams at each school are guided by a specific decision-making process within the PBIS framework. This framework involves examining our data, systems, and practices, and starts with identifying what our goals or outcomes are. Our overreaching goal as educators is to improve student social competence and academic achievement by creating positive, safe, and engaging learning environments. To reach or improve our outcomes, we need to review data. Data can include discipline referrals, SEL survey data, our BOF data or behavior observation form, or attendance data. Practices are key to improving the outcomes. Practices are the strategies we use to support students at every level. In PBIS, these practices are supported by research to target the outcomes schools want to see. And systems are the way we support schools to help their adults. In PBIS, these systems support accurate implementation of practices. We measure PBIS implementation using the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, or the TFI. Each spring, PBIS coaches, along with their Tier 1 teams, assess the fidelity of implementation using the TFI. The TFI includes 15 features, which are divided into 3 sections. The first is teaming, second, implementation, and the third is evaluation. For today's learning, we'll focus on decision-making using our data both at the school level and at the classroom level, as reflected in these features, 1.12 and 1.13. And throughout, we'll look at how ongoing communication plays an important role in implementation. We'll start with 1.12, discipline data. The Tier 1 team has instantaneous access to graphed reports summarizing discipline data organized by the type of problem behavior, the frequency, the location, the time of day, and by individual student. TFI Feature 1.13 is data-based decision-making. The Tier 1 team reviews and uses discipline data and academic outcome data at least monthly for decision-making. Teams use school behavioral data to identify patterns and problem solve. Schools that share behavioral data with all staff regularly are more likely to sustain fidelity of PBIS implementation. And when data is shared with staff, staff are better able to understand the work of the team as well as their own role in establishing a positive and safe learning environment. We might ask ourselves, why use data for decision-making? Data helps us ask the right questions. Using data helps us to accurately identify problems and come up with solutions. Using data interrupts our biases and promotes equity. And data places the problem in the context of the environment rather than in the students. The PBIS classroom practices are connected to the teaching and learning framework for providing an effective learning environment. Red flags within our behavioral data may also point us back to the need for increased Tier 1 support. Student behavior can be supported by increasing the frequency, duration, and intensity of some of the basic PBIS classroom practices. On the left are examples of how these classroom practices may be adapted to meet student needs. PBIS classroom practices and other resources can be assessed via class link. Teams engage in active database decision-making with a specific focus on equity. Inequitable outcomes are first examined from a systems perspective before considering individual behavior support. When concerning patterns are noted, team develop action plans with short and long-term solutions. Use of data. As you view this video, listen for the importance of reviewing behavioral data regularly to see trends, problem solve, and identify students in need of more support. Also, as you're looking at this video, listen for the importance of sharing data with staff on a regular basis to increase buy-in and sustainment of PBIS implementation.
Not run by the administrator, it is run by the entire school. However, in order to make this practical, a PBIS team is created within the school. The PBIS team does not run PBIS, it acts as a representative body in the school to facilitate communication and action in a simple but comprehensive manner. Ideally, the PBIS team includes persons that represent all the stakeholder groups in the school. One way to think about this is to consider whether every adult in the school can look at the team and point to a person that represents him or her. This representation is crucial in terms of getting buy-in and consistent implementation. PBIS teams typically meet monthly to look at data and evaluate where changes are necessary. Module 6 in this series describes the process of data collection, but here we're looking at the uses of this data in 3 key ways at each meeting. The first is to evaluate progress towards school goals. For example, a school may have developed a general goal of reducing suspensions or a more specific goal of reducing discipline referrals from the cafeteria. In either case, the team looks at the data available to evaluate progress. If progress is adequate, the success is reported back to the full faculty and staff to reinforce continued use of those prevention strategies and keep them in place. The second key is to look generally at discipline data in an attempt to see any new trends. Sometimes in the middle of the year, a new hotspot or new problem behavior or new problem condition pops up. By looking at the data each month, the team can get out ahead of these problems and confer back with the faculty and staff with regard to simple prevention solutions. Finally, The team should look for students whose behaviors indicate that prevention efforts are not working. That is, they look to identify students in need of further support. For example, the team may designate a criterion for number of discipline reports necessary to prompt further assessment. As a general rule of thumb, the criterion for such identification should identify 15 to 20% of the school's population. Not all of these students will require attention at an elevated tier, but all deserve a closer look to better understand the predictability of their behavior.
We use data every day to make informed decisions. We check the weather forecast, the traffic report, our bank account, our fuel gauge, and our calendars. What types of data do schools use? What types of data do school PBIS teams use? Consider that. We'll share some with you now, some examples of academic and behavioral data that schools typically use to progress monitor. We see some examples of academics, universal screening, common formative assessment, grades, progress monitoring, historical SOL results. And then on the behavior side, we use office discipline referrals, some suspension, attendance, citizenship, nursing or counselor logs, classroom behavioral data, SEL survey data. How familiar are you with these forms of data? What is the benefit of collecting classroom data? One of the data sources listed on the previous slide was an office discipline referral. Reviewing ODRs can give us opportunities to analyze major behavioral incidents and to develop solutions. Another data source listed was classroom behavioral data. This data can also be analyzed to determine solutions. Problem solving around classroom behavioral data is helpful because this is the data that captures the behaviors that are not office discipline referral worthy, but could become office discipline referrals if not addressed. So collecting classroom data helps assist us with problem solving, helps teachers to identify additional needs for support, provides data that can inform meaningful school-wide solutions, and you'll have data to take at future meetings if needed, parent conference, SRT, etc. Classroom data collections, we're going to show you a few samples. It's sometimes collected by using what's referred to as a behavior observation form, or BOF. Some schools, PBIS teams, use a paper version of the behavior observation form to collect classroom managed data. Some schools teams have developed Google Forms to collect classroom managed data. Here we see the behavior the student was engaged in. And here we see the activity the student was engaged in at the time of the behavior. The team looks at this data monthly to see if there are patterns in the school-wide behavior. This data is helpful for school teams not only to see if there are school-wide patterns in behavior, but to also identify those students who may be in need of additional support. Here is an example of a middle school behavior observation form. This form is completed during a grade level or department team meeting. So they do it together at their meeting. And then it's being collected and reviewed to determine if there are behavioral patterns either school-wide or by grade level. And then they develop solution based on the problem. Another example that some high schools might use, or any school can use, is a parent contact form, or the log. It allows a person filling out the form to note the date, time of day, the behavior that occurred, the student's grade level, and possible motivation for behavior. What data sources currently exist in your school that could be used to document classroom behavioral data? You might even consider using think sheets. If you use those at school, that's good information to collect and to look at when reviewing data. Classroom data collection form. Here's just another sample of a behavior observation form. So take a note in the change of the language. The behavior definitions were updated to align with the new state guidelines that went into effect during this school year, 21-22. These state guidelines are referenced as SBAR, Student Behavioral and Administrator Response, and can be found in the VBCPS 2021-22 Code of Conduct. Your school's PBIS coach is able to supply sample behavior observation forms and Google Forms for collecting classroom behavioral data for kindergarten through 12th grade students.
When we analyze the data, there are several questions that need to be answered. Is there a problem? What areas or systems are involved? Does the problem involve lots of students or just a few? What kinds of problems are happening? When are they happening? One of the most difficult questions to answer is, why do we think these problems are occurring? If we have an idea of the reason why the behavior is sustaining, we can try to implement solutions matched to the function of the behavior for greater likelihood of success. We want to be able to answer these questions with our data to direct us to the last question. What is the most effective use of our resources? Why do we look to identify motivation of behavior? Because behavior is a communication. It has a function. It occurs as a sequence of events, and behavior can be changed through an instructional approach. If we're not aware of the function of the behavior, we could be inadvertently reinforcing a behavior that we actually want to extinguish. When understanding behavior, we want to learn what function or purpose the behavior is serving the student. There's always a payoff. What is it? We need to understand it from the student's perspective. What are they getting or trying to get or avoid from engaging in this behavior? When developing solutions, we need to keep in mind that the function will remain the same. We have to understand what replacement behaviors or coping strategies to better address the student's needs. Take a moment to look at some examples of obtain. Sometimes students are trying to get peer attention or adult attention. They may be trying to avoid either a difficult task or a non-preferred activity. When we think of function of behavior, it's important to consider that some students who have trauma histories avoid or fear connections because of the harmful, hurtful, or scary outcomes of relationships in their past. You may see this when a student resists your attempts to build a relationship or when a compliment backfires. Resistance doesn't necessarily mean students are unwilling to have a relationship. It may mean they don't yet feel safe enough to trust it. Authentic relationships take time, and we need to be empathetic and respectful of the student's right to doubt us and their need to take it slow. Keep in mind that the relationship we're trying to build is designed to help the student. It's not about us. Here we see pictured a book that's available in the Virginia Beach City Public Schools virtual library, Relationship, Responsibility, and Regulation by Kristen Van Marter Sewers and Pete Hall. After the PBIS team reviews their data and discovers a school level problem, the next step is to develop a precision statement. Here we see the benefit of precisely identifying the problem. Instead of saying the students are out of control after lunch, a data-informed statement is more precise and allows for better solution development. Fifth grade students are losing 8 to 10 minutes of instructional time due to off-task behavior when returning to class after lunch. Peer attention is perceived to be the function. What is going on? We have off-task behavior. Where is it happening? In the classroom. Who? Our fifth graders. When is it happening? After lunch. And why do we think it's happening? To get peer attention. The next step is to identify a measurable goal. For example, within the next 2 weeks, fifth grade students will begin their work within 5 minutes of returning to class. Goals allow teams to analyze, monitor, and adjust practices. They should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. After teams develop their goal, they brainstorm ideas for solutions that meet the function of behavior in safe and appropriate ways. The solution action steps contain 7 components: prevent, teach, recognize, extinguish, a consequence, safety, and evaluation. In this example, sample solutions are included for each of the components. You don't have to include every component when coming up with solutions. Usually, if you implement solutions within the first 3 components, that seems to be effective. This process can support individual teachers too. Here we see a precision statement centering around problem behavior in one particular class. Since his Bell 3 students have returned to school from break, Mr. Cortez noticed that incidences of low-level physical contact during transitions have increased from 4 the week prior to break to 12 the week students returned. He's not sure why this behavior is happening. After trying a few strategies, he decides to ask for help from the department representative on the PBIS Tier 1 team. What is the problem? Physical contact is increasing. Where is it happening? In the classroom. Who does it involve? Bell 3. When is it happening? During transitions. And why does he think it's happening? He is not sure. Listen to this goal and determine whether or not it meets the criteria listed. Within the next 10 days, incidents of low-level physical contact will decrease from 12 to 5 as measured by the behavior log. Please pause the webinar here and read how Mr. Cortez and the PBIS team representative develop solutions for each of the components. A tool that can help both teams and individual teachers is the problem-solving worksheet you see here. We've discussed these steps throughout the presentation, and we provide links to problem-solving worksheets such as this in the module resources section. When we look at our data, we need to always consider data that reflects disproportionality. When any group shows up in the data at a disproportionate rate, the team needs to ask why. When looking at your precise problem, are certain groups over or underrepresented in the data? Here's a precision statement identified by a school that reveals discipline disproportionality for a specific group of students, boys. Among all office and classroom managed referrals reported, males are the gender for whom the majority of problem behavior, excessive noise is being observed, with a 9-to-1 ratio of boys to girls. Classroom is reported to be the location with the most excessive noise and is observed across all grade levels. Males make up 51% of the population. Here's another precision statement revealing disproportionality, this time for Black students. Disproportionate discipline data for various subgroups, including males, Black students, and students with disabilities, is well known across not only our division, but within the state of Virginia and across the country as well. African American students are more likely to receive office referrals in the classroom for excessive noise. These referrals are most likely to occur after lunch and are related to students receiving peer attention. In response to this need, the PBIS coaching team has developed the Guide for Response to Discipline Disproportionality, which has been adapted from PBIS.org practice brief. Input from teachers, school leaders, Department of Student Leadership, students, families, and other central office staff has been used to create and revise the guide. Examples for analyzing data and implementing solution action steps are included in this guide. Before using the guide, teams and administrators need a deeper understanding of cultural responsiveness within the PBIS framework. This module, along with the module for using the disproportionality guide, is available in this fundamental learning series. Thank you for participating in today's learning. If you have specific questions, please reach out to your school's PBIS team.